This is Risk, a game of global domination. It was originally created by Albert Lamorisse, a famous film director. You might actually be familiar with his 1956 film Le Ballon Rouge, or The Red Balloon. Risk was originally published in France in 1957 under the title La Conquête du Monde, or The Conquest of the World. Parker Brothers later purchased production rights and officially released the game under the title Risk in 1959. Today, I have this 1968 edition of Risk. This is kind of neat because it actually has the original game art. This is the board art from 1959, and a number of other elements from 1959 are featured in this, and we're going to compare to this 2015 edition of Risk. Now, I purchased this right off the shelf the other day. It just opened this up and played this, so I know that there are many different versions, but this one is still current, and I thought this would make the best comparison that I could do between the original and the new. So let's dive right in, starting with the 1968 Parker Brothers release of Risk. Right away, this is very eye-catching, and we've got the title of the game in big, bold print, and the tagline at this time was the Continental Game. Now we can see a family having fun playing the game, and we're going to notice conspicuously in this space we have an arrow made out of little red cubes, and if you look closely when the family's playing, all of their army pieces are little cubes, and that's because in the original release of Risk, the army pieces were wood, and they had cubes of various sizes, so small for 1 army, medium for 5, and large for 10. Now, to cut production costs, the pieces were later made into plastic, so we'll get into that as we look at the components of the game, but I wanted to point out that this is the original cover art, and it does hint to the original components of the game. The back of the box is blank, and this is a lift-off top box. When we open it up, we have a gorgeous organizer. I love it. It's printed in the Risk motif with little soldiers on display. What's funny is this predates the actual soldier pieces that were later added into the game, so we're still dealing with sparse cubes or extruded plastic parts. At one point, they even had the plastic parts extruded to look like Roman numerals to dictate how big the army was. So this is a very nice, very well put together box with all the appointments needed to hold all of the game components securely and protect them from damage. So points to Parker Brothers. The original game box is very nice, albeit, again, by today's standards, these boxes are considered pretty big because of the long boxes due to the boards folding in half, but I like it. Classic board game box. When we move over to the 2015 edition, now again, I want to clarify, I just picked this off a store shelf the other day in 2025. So this is a currently available edition of Risk that appears to be the core version. I understand that there are a number of other licensed versions of Risk. But right away when we look at this, again, the big, bold red lettering for Risk, very iconic. I love the cavalry soldier charging at you with his saber raised. Now this is called the Game of Strategic Conquest. So the tagline has changed over the years. It's also been called the Game of Global Domination, but I find it interesting that now it's Strategic Conquest. When we flip it over, we see some nice close-up pictures of the game components and the game board. Though again, what's interesting is I'm seeing in a lot of these more modern games, we don't see many depictions of people on the back of the box playing the game as we used to. So interesting point of note. When we open it up, again, this feels so premium. Everything's organized so nicely. There's a place for the dice, a place for the cards. There's a nice caddy to hold all the boxes that contain your soldiers. Now the boxes that contain the soldiers are cardboard instead of plastic, which is really nice. So overall, and I do want to point out too, the lower portion of the box, this is a two-part, so you have the lid and the base. The edges of the base are printed. That's something that tickles me when they print every available space on the box for presentation's sake. So again, Risk, both in 1968 or 59, as this is a throwback to, and 2015 or 2025, the presentation right out of the box is fantastic. One thing I do want to note is Hasbro took pains to cut down on plastic use. When I opened this up, the cards were wrapped in a recyclable cellulose, which is like a type of paper made of natural components that will help protect from moisture. Again, like I said, the plastic army pieces are in cardboard boxes. So though we have plastic components, which the dice and the army pieces, which Risk rely on, I still gotta applaud them for reducing waste. And the box for the cards did not come pre-assembled. It was a little cardboard punch out that I simply slipped together. This was really nice, and the whole artistic motif of the packaging is just fantastic. So I gotta say, I really appreciate both boxes from both eras. I gotta say, I lean a little bit more towards the modern one just because of how compact it is and that full color print, including art on the back. This gives you kind of an idea what you're in for the game, but you'll get a much better feel for how complex the game is with the closer look you get on the back of the modern edition. So let's take a moment and look at the game and its components, starting with this 1968 Parker Brothers edition of Risk. And right away, I want to point out, like I did earlier, this game art is the game art that released in 1959. Same with the box art. This version of Risk is designed to mimic the original as much as possible at the time. So the art on the cards is the same. I love the Parker Brothers Risk title card. You got the wild cards here with silhouettes of the soldiers. But everything is really nice as far as fit and finish and designed to look like the original release of the game. I very much appreciate it. Wow, those cards are very loud dropping back into the box. That was surprising. Like I said, the fact that everything is stowed nicely right out of the carton is amazing. I really like the fact that this is a single piece board that folds in half. Now, one thing that I noticed though is since it folds in half and it's a perfect square, the map, the aspect ratio of the world map is really squished and really odd. I do like the bright, bold colors, but how the territories are distributed, it gets a little dicey when you get to the far edges of the map. Though everything else is very friendly, and this screams 1959. I love the dolphins. I love the lettering on the bottom. I love the font. You have these little spots here that actually remind you of how many armies you earn per turn for having an entire continent claimed, so there's a nice quick reference there. So all in all, the board is very attractive. When we get into the dice, I love clear red dice. I don't know why, they just feel classic and, I don't know, casino-y to me. And we have white six-sided die. We have 3 of each. The combat in the game, you will have a defender and attacker rolling against each other. Now what's interesting is if you are the defender, you only require 2 six-sided dice to defend, and the defender always wins in a tie. The attacker has the advantage of rolling 3 dice and getting to pick the 2 top scoring dice to match up against the defender. So realistically, you only need 3 of one color and 2 of another, but I appreciate that they included 3 of each so that a player has the choice if they feel lucky or better throwing red die over white dice. So I think that's a lot of fun, and I think that's a nice another premium touch to the game. The cards, like I showed earlier, they're very nicely printed. They're very snappy. Now these are just a regular card stock. There's no linen or anything to that, but they are shiny. They have no sign that they were punched out, so these were die cut. Very nice quality cards. Now, these cards, you only have territory cards and wild cards in this as a dynamic of the gameplay. As you conquer territories, you will collect cards and be able to turn them in for bonus armies that you can use on your way towards victory. We're not going to get into the weeds with the rules. This game can be a little bit complex, but as far as strategy games are concerned, it's really easy. Essentially, players will take turns drafting their countries or setting down and claiming countries and then distributing their armies before the game begins. They can attack adjacent countries. So let's say I've got the red army here and the blue army here, and I have enough troops in Greenland that I can attack Iceland. We would roll against each other until the enemy armies were depleted and I either win or am repelled. So as far as strategy, it's straightforward, and a lot of it is based on statistics. You know, obviously, if you have more armies in a territory attacking fewer armies, you're more likely to win. But there are times where luck can be at your back, and I've seen really small armies deplete really large armies, which is part of the fun. I actually very much embrace chaos in board games. I really like to have a lot of randomness to board games. I mean, strategy is nice and you should have a fair amount of strategy, but a lot of fun comes into play when things don't go according to plan. And that's something that I really enjoy in board games. And I feel like Risk strikes a really fantastic balance in strategy and luck as far as how the game plays out. So it's a really great experience. Best when played with more than 4 players, if at all possible. If you can get a whole table of 6, go for it. It's a blast. But they do have special rules, so if you only have 2 people available to play, you'll actually put a neutral player on some of the territories, and the territories will be divided up at in a more random way. Generally speaking, you'll just deal out cards and place your armies on those territories, and that adds some challenge because then you have to work at claiming an entire continent to get that troop bonus. So they have some different rule sets to spice it up. Not only do they have a rule set for 2 players to make it a little bit more accessible and more fun than just, you know, 2 big armies duking it out, but they also do add in something called capital risk, where players will have a territory that's their capital, and if an enemy player sacks their capital, that player loses. There's also secret mission risk, which is a lot of fun. You will be assigned a secret mission, like take over this particular continent or eliminate this particular player, and if you do that, you win. These are ways to modify the game of Risk so it doesn't take so long, because the original rule set requires a player to completely defeat all of their opponents and take every territory on the map. And that can get a little bit dark in the later stages and a little rough when you have a player who just has no way of earning enough armies to fight back, while the player who dominates most of the territory continues to get even more and more overwhelming force to use against you. So the snowball effect of earning more armies by virtue of owning more territory really does cause a tipping point in the game to hit hard and fast. But because everything is still settled with the roll of the dice, playing out the end of the game can feel like it drags out. So oftentimes players will concede well before all the territories are taken, knowing that they won't really be able to fight back too far. And that's never a fun way to end the game. So I do appreciate having the option to play things like capital risk or secret mission risk to not only spice up the gameplay, but speed it up a little bit. So I gotta say, this 1968 edition, as far as presentation, is awesome, but the biggest drawback for me is the implementation of plastic parts. And this is really early in Parker Brothers' phase of implementing plastic parts. So these are the least decorative of all of the plastic pieces that Parker Brothers ever implemented in Risk, and that is the 5-pointed and 3-pointed stars. So in this version of Risk, you only get 2 player tokens, one for 1 army, that's this little 3-pointed star, and one for 10 armies, which is this 5-pointed star here. In all other versions of Risk that I'm aware of, you at least get a 1 army, 5 army, 10 army piece spread, much like you see on this modern one where you have a single soldier, a cavalry unit, or a cannon to signify 1, 5, or 10. In fact, in the Roman numeral editions, I think they had 1, 3, 5, and 10 as well, if I'm not mistaken. So this is one of the cheaper iterations production-wise of Risk, even though they have these lovely clear plastic containers for your player pieces. These are great. I'm not gonna lie, I can't argue with the fit and finish, and it's hard to say. It's hard to throw the accusation of, oh, they're cutting corners, they're cutting costs, but this is really an early sign of it, as everything else is very well made and the fit and finish is fantastic. Then you get to the actual player pieces, which are the nuts and bolts. They're the real backbone of Risk. These counter pieces are so important to the gameplay, and having a spread between 1, 5, and 10 at the very least is crucial and makes the game a whole lot easier to play, because otherwise you're stacking 5 of these little 3-pointed armies. Some of these territories, it gets really crowded really fast. Then 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, it's frustrating. So it's nice to have, for obvious reasons, various denominations to use as tokens. So the fact that they don't even give you more variants and at least 3 token types to use is really disappointing, and an obvious show of the cost cutting that went into the design of this one. Also, the fact that these molds are not fancy. I mean, why 1 army is a little 3-pointed star thingy? Why 10 armies is a bigger 5-pointed star thingy? I mean, they didn't even do plastic cubes or anything. The shape doesn't even make sense. So aside from the player pieces, I actually very much like the board that folds in half. This takes up a lot less table space, so though for artistic reasons, I actually like a larger board, and we'll get into that in a minute. I do think there are advantages to having a more compact board, because this is an extensive game, and it's a good idea to pick your games for your space. So I would say that there are some people who might not have a kitchen table if they're living in a small area that can accommodate Risk with multiple players without spreading out and getting some TV trays. So good on them for keeping it a relatively traditional size. I think this is at like your 20-inch range here. So other than that, I really actually like the art on the board. Like I said before, the happy whale, the sailboat, it's very 50s. I love all the containers and bits and bobs. The containers for your pieces are sturdy. The box for your cards is nice. The cards are nice and snappy cardstock. The dice have a good weight to them, and I love translucent red. I love translucent red. That'll win for me. So aside from the extruded plastic pieces that kind of suck, the 1968 Risk, very nice fit and finish. Now, let's pop into the game itself on the 2015 side. Like I said before, I really appreciated that they still included a box for the cards, even though the plastic caddy inside was, on first glance, what I thought was all I'd get. So that was nice, and it's printed to really match the motif. As you can see right away looking at this, everything looks battle-worn and pre-weathered, and I enjoy that with the artistic design. Like, for instance, your game play pieces, your little armies, fit into these little boxes that are actually painted to look like wooden footlockers, complete with metalwork hinges on all the corners, and they just flip open like that. They got those little tuck tabs. So this is a really nice way to avoid using plastic and really make them stylish. I like this a lot, and they fit very nicely in the caddy organizer. So I will say, going into the cards, we have some differences in the cards, mainly that these include a set of secret mission cards. You'll notice that they have a red band, whereas your regular cards do not have that band. So, like I said before, there are multiple rule sets to Risk, and one of them is secret mission. You don't get secret mission rules in the original Risk. That's not added in yet. The original Risk, you just get the base rules and what they call the French rules. We'll look at that in a moment with the rule books as we pop into that. The French rules are a different variation that extend the game. However, secret mission, we're bringing this up because there's the difference in cards here. Each one of these cards will have a goal for you to achieve. So as I said before, eliminate another player or capture a specific territory. The rest of these are, again, just your territory cards, same as what was included in the original there. However, man, these cards feel cheap. These cards feel cheap. They're not snappy at all. They're well printed, but boo. Extra weight to the cardstock makes all the difference, and this is disappointing. This is, I'm tisking. Tisk. Hasbro, shame on you. So be better. That's what they say, right? Be better. So cards, though functional, are thin, floppy, and not so supple and snappy as I feel they should be. However, the dice are weighty and chunky and colorful, and though they're not translucent red, they're red and blue. However, now blue is defense, as you only get 2 of them, and red is assault because you get 3 of them. So they did catch on to you only need 2 to defend no matter what. Now you don't have player choice. Attack is red, defense is blue, but that color combination is logical to me. So I think it works. And besides, the quality of dice, I'm not going to complain here. Nice chunky dice. They're so fun to throw around. I can't stop doing it. So, I mean, one more for good measure. I mean, I know I said 1, but I don't want to be rude. I mean, they're there. Okay, anyway, very nice chunky dice, Hasbro. So I don't like your cards, but I like your dice. The actual player pieces are great. However, I'm confused by one of the dynamics here is, I used to like playing as the red armies, and red or black, and those are the 2 colors that changed. There's no longer a red army, there's an orange, like what Ford Motor Company would call competition orange back in the 60s. I mean, it's nice, it's okay. Iceland's where I took the red one, there we go. The actual figures are great. You have an infantryman for 1 army, you have cavalry for 5, and you have a cannon for 10. And that's not the first time they've had that. That's been a convention in Risk for a while now, but I love to see it alive and well here. The addition of the actual shapes where they look like soldiers really sells it. That's something that I can say as part of the evolution of Risk over the years. When I think of Risk, I think of these little Continental toy soldiers. And speaking of Continental, geez, this map is great. I like that it looks weathered and worn on the sides there, and on the edges you've got some latitude and longitude printed on here. You've got shipping routes, compass rows. You've got your you've still got your little cheat sheets for how many additional armies you get for the territories, but now it's like a little medallion next to the territory there. And because the board is folded into quarters, it's able to spread out and give you a more traditional looking wall map, not so much of a condensed looking world map here that makes Asia look a little bit strange. This one, it's a little bit spread out. They're still condensed, you know, obviously we're not printing on a globe here, so there's going to be some obvious distortion of the size of these continents, but other than that, this just feels nice. This feels like you're playing on a map, so on like an old treasure map, on like some sort of nautical thing. So I really enjoy that. The presentation is nice, albeit I will say one thing I hate about quarterfold boards is I can't get this little spot here to fit up flush. I'm hoping that as the board breaks in more, it will, but that really drives me nuts that I have this about 1/8 of an inch gap right here between these 2 sections of board. So again, that's one reason why I don't like quarterfold, and I would almost put up with this folding in half and having the footprint of the box larger for the quality of parts included. Because otherwise, you know, like I said, I would say the cards and the quarterfold board are the only thing in this that really don't feel super premium. And I guess with the quarterfold board, I'm sort of being picky because the edges are taped nicely except for where it actually meets here. And the tag board is of good weight. So it's very nicely printed too. The board art's very attractive. So I gotta say the modern Hasbro edition of Risk, also the fact that it includes all the options for the various rule sets. So your capital Risk, your secret mission Risk, your 2-player Risk. So I do want to clarify, this original set here is set up so that you can play a multiplayer game up to 6 players. You can set it up to play the 2-player variant of Risk. You also are provided with the French rules for Risk, whereas this version, you don't get the French rules, probably because the game is so far removed from the original release that most people weren't even cognizant of the fact that there was a French release, or at least a separate set of rules for the French release. So in this instance, what we're playing with is traditional Risk, the full game of global domination, where you take over the whole map. secret mission risk, where you have your own secret mission that your own custom victory parameter to achieve. Capital risk, where you go after specific capital territories, and the 2-player variant, where you have a non-player character and random assignment of your territories for the players to spice up the gameplay. So the modern version is made with all 4 of those game types in mind. So something to consider, be it that for secret mission to work, you have to at least have secret mission dice. But other than that, the same core game lives on between both. Now, before we get into really hardcore comparisons of the game, let's talk about the rule books, starting with this 1968 edition. Now, this one is copyright 1963. When you're in this era of production for board games, you have to pay real close attention to the copyright stamps trying to date these, because when we sourced this, it was originally thought that this was in 1959 until these player pieces were spotted and some closer inspection. So the board, for instance, is copyright stamp 1959 because that's when this art was copyrighted. The box is also copyrighted to 1968. And also you can tell based on the fact that 68 is when they introduced, or when they had, I don't know if this is the first introduction, I believe it may be, the plastic pieces. This is one of the early introductions of plastic pieces. So these, for obvious reasons, these plastic pieces where you had the stars didn't last very long and eventually became the Roman numerals. So this is actually very similar to your original rule set, save for the print changed in 63. You have regular black and white print on bond paper. It's saddle stitched, and it's this nice little multi-page booklet. So, and it explains the rules in full detail. And actually, one thing that I thought was really nice is the back of the book, you have the original French rules. So if you want to play Risk as it was originally designed and intended, you can. That being said, nice rule book. Obviously, it stood the test of time. I usually like to see sealed paper, but that's kind of splitting hairs at this point, because at this vintage, you weren't seeing that too much, just due to the print process and cost. So excellent rule book for the time. Now, let's have a look at the 2015 edition's rule book. Now, again, like I said, I did pull this off the shelf in 2025 just a couple of weeks ago. So copyright-wise, this version of the game and these rules were introduced in 2015, but it could have been produced anytime between then and now. That being said, this is a great-looking full-color print saddle stitch rule book. Everything is beautifully illustrated or photographed and inserted in here. So, I mean, it looks just fantastic. Everything's very clear. I'm a visual creature, and so I very much like how this rule book is put together. And again, it has this wax seal and sort of leather-bound look with the art print on the outside. It's sealed full color paper, full bleed, so this is obviously going to stand the test of times. However, both of these rule books, I want to point out, though saddle stitched, both of them have a staple on the spine. So none of that fancy linen stuff that we've been seeing in some of these high-end games. But an excellent rule book, more than adequate. So points to Hasbro. Fit and finish is great. So let's get into the actual comparison and what we think here. I do not want to get political, but I'm gonna say that a number of interesting territory names have changed in these versions. So I thought that was something that was right away kind of amusing, but we're not going to debate over whether or not those were right or wrong. I'm just noting that they were spotted when we unpacked these games. So obviously some shifts in global politics between 1959 and now have led to some interesting naming conventions as far as how the game is put together. But that being said, the territories otherwise are pretty much the same. I mean, obviously their shapes have changed a bit due to the size of the board and the aspect ratio that it's printed on, but you have the same amount of territories and the same general placement of your territories. So the core rules of the game, though variations have been added, have stayed relatively the same. Like I said, though there are drawbacks to the quarterfold board, I actually really appreciate the space. However, I do think that there is something to be said for having the ability to play a more compact version of Risk, because arguably there's a lot of dead space that's not used for play on these boards because the board is based on a map such as it is. So like all this ocean space, this isn't dedicated to gameplay. So you can see that the designers in the modern version really took that to heart, and they minimized the bodies of water and maximized the play space. Whereas it's kind of surprising considering everything they did to fit the global map onto this square here in 1959, yet they really retained a lot of the space for the bodies of water, as opposed to making them a bit more compact. However, the bold colors are nice. Like I said, I very much like the print quality as well as the art. I think the art it just screams 1959. Some of these vintage pieces, you can just tell the era that they were made in by the art style, and I love it. It has a really unique, quaint feel. So I very much appreciate that. And I will say the durability of a single fold board with taped edges, both of these have very nice weight, sliding on my tablecloth here, very nice weight to the tag board. I would say the 59 or 68 edition is thicker, but not by much. And not that this really needs to be much thicker. This is well beyond the feeling cheap level. This is into the decent quality board level that I expect, just on the thinner edge of that. So have I felt heavier game boards that I think will hold up better? Absolutely. Do I think that this one's too light to hold up? No, not at all. I think definitely overall fit and finish of the Hasbro version of the game is great. The dice on the new one, though, definitely feel heavier. Not by a whole lot, but they do. They do feel really nice. The size-wise, they're identical. Nothing to write home about. But weight-wise, oh, the new ones just feel nice. They roll nice. Vintage version of Risk wins out on the weight of cards. Vintage version, I don't think I can say wins out on the player pieces. As much as I like the plastic storage boxes, I see no reason why the cardboard is inadequate. It's lighter weight, may not hold up forever, but the flip side is I do understand plastic reduction, and there's no reason why you can't get a lot of life out of these if they were gently treated. So I'm going to go ahead and side with overall production quality, what you get for your purchase, what comes with the game. The modern Risk is well worth your investment. Like I said, there are multiple versions of it that are out today. There are tons of themed editions of Risk. I bought this one, like I said, I was out game shopping. I saw this one on the shelf. This looked like your proper classic Risk with the pieces that I grew up with. And I'm glad that this is the one that I picked up for the review, because it's everything that I thought of with Risk, but I really enjoy the board art. I really like the sculpts for the pieces, and the plastic feels good. The plastic doesn't feel silly or fragile or cruddy. Like, even if the parts are a bit thin, like I'm tugging on the character legs, seeing if I can break them, and it's not. No, I would have to actually be intentionally snapping this to break. This is not going to just snap on its own in the package. And I gotta say, I love being able to have 1, 5, or 10 as opposed to just 1 or just 10 as far as my counters are concerned. So is it neat to have a retro version of Risk? If you have a particular affectation for a given year, yeah. The game does not require a whole lot of tweaking, and obviously hasn't gotten a whole lot over the years. I'd be interested to play with the French rules. I didn't realize they differed so much till I saw the instruction manual for this. So I think that might be fun. I'm always game to try different rule sets, because I think that just expands the usefulness of your board game. But I feel like the player pieces are such a massive drawback. The map, like I said, I like that it's compact, but I will say I'm really much more sold on having a little bit bigger of a map. So between the player pieces and the map, the game board, again, the modern version is really it. I'd only go after one of these older ones if I had an affectation, and I certainly don't see a reason why 1968 would have been a fond memory for anybody getting these plastic pieces. In fact, I dare say that I would almost want to try to reproduce the wooden cubes to make this feel more like a 59 edition. Albeit 3 sizes of wooden cubes is still harder to translate than even the Roman numerals that came later, or just plain replacing with a set of your little figurines. But it all depends on how historically accurate you want to be, and I don't really see a need to modify beyond that. So I'd say going after one of these, just go after a classic if it's an affectation or something that you really got to have because you had it as a kid. But if you just want to play, you want to get your money's worth, the modern Risk from Hasbro is a fine value. They need to get better at producing their cards at a heavier weight, and I really would like to see a fold in half board instead of a quarter fold board. But if those are my only 2 complaints, the rest of it I think was well worth the investment and well worth your time. There's tons of fun to be had with Risk. So I gotta ask, are you a fan of Risk? Is there a particular version that I don't have on display here that you have an affectation for? Comment below and let me know. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.